This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Winter Moon and Coffee Stain, poems and lyrics by Keith Giles. In this collection, author and poet Keith Giles has gathered some of his best poems and song lyrics into one volume. Written between 1980 and 2024, these poems span a variety of subjects ranging from love and loss to grief and restoration, and everything learned along the way. Winter Moon and Coffee Stain available now on Amazon.
Liminal, a word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Liminal Living Podcast. I'm your curator of conversations, Tom Rundell, and today we are diving deeply into a very relevant and crucial conversation with my guest, Matt Tebbe. Now, just a content warning, we are talking politics today. And very honestly, very openly, very clearly, if you are triggered by political conversations, they make you anxious, they make you angry, they fill you with lots of different feels, maybe wait and do this episode when you are in a prepared place. But I did not want to spring this on you. But we do very much talk openly about that. A little bit about Matt. This is his second time on the podcast. We had him on last year. He was a part of our recast series in August of this year. And Matt is the co-pastor of the Table Church. And he's also co-founder of Gravity Leadership, an organization dedicated to developing leaders who live and lead out of a deep connection with God themselves and the world around them. So I'm thrilled to have Matt back on the podcast. I always learn so much when I'm reading him or just talking with him on a podcast. Last time we tackled issues of money and power and abuse in the church, and it was a really amazing conversation. Today, we take it a step further and we explore the intersection of our faith and politics and this current cultural, political, economic, messy moment that we're in, and the role that the church plays in the face of authoritarianism on the rise and the political theater that we watch on our televisions. Matt has this keen eye for naming the hard truths of our political landscape while grounding his perspective in the teachings of Jesus. And we'll also talk about how Christians can engage politically without compromising their faith or crossing lines of church and state that are uncomfortable places to go, and what it means to care for the common good in these divisive times. So I'm excited to have this conversation for you with Matt Tebbe, and so without further ado, enjoy. Matt Tebbe, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast for the second time. It is great to have you back here.
Tom, it's good to be back.
Now, I just re-aired the episode where we talked about money and power and abuse in the church. Over April, I did a recast series because I wanted a vacation and I needed to get a little running start in the fall. And I'm just going to be honest, I always listen to the podcast when it drops, and I listened to your episode again. I was like, man, that was some good stuff. We went to some good places.
Yeah, we did. We had fun. That it's one of the few podcasts I've been invited on to talk about that stuff. So I really appreciated that opportunity, Tom.
Oh, see, in my mind, I'm like, who's the expert on talking money and politics and stuff in the church? Matt Tebbe. I'm just going to bring him on.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. It's interesting. Politics and well, let's get into it. I will say that I am a zealous amateur when it comes to all this. So no degrees, no think tank positions, no elected office. So just fair warning.
Yeah. I think I'm in the same boat. Like, we're doing a reinterpreting James series, and I'm reinterpreting James from the Greek into the English, kind of in a more imaginative thing. And I put it right on the front, like, hey, I am not a Greek scholar, but I am kind of doing a Lectio Divina approach to translating it. But I'm not trying to write a new Bible or anything. So it's like, heads up, not totally professional. I know just enough to be dangerous. So. Well, what is new in your life and your church?
Yeah. Well, we've been a church plant for about 10 years this next year, about 9 years now, I guess that would be. And we've moved buildings, rented space for our whole life of our church, but we were moving into a permanent space at the end of the month. And it's about 3 times as much space as we have now. And it's, a 70-year-old building, and it's got all kinds of needs. And so we're in the busy mode of creating teams and cleaning it up and getting it ready to inhabit here in like 3 weeks, Tom. So it's that's pretty all-consuming for a church our size. This fall,
I would say so. That's a big hefty deal to move into a church, a brand new space. Is it like a former church? Is it like what did the building used to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're an Episcopal church, and an Episcopal congregation was in there until December, and their congregation closed, and then the diocese decided to offer it to us to move into, and so it's been really sweet. Like, we've been working with some of the former members of the previous church to move in there, and they're helping us actually do it. So it's kind of a nice handshake or handoff, kind of how I would hope it would be.
Oh, nice. I was a part of a blend where a new Wesleyan church was merging with a shutting down American Baptist church.
Okay.
That was an interesting little blend, and we took over their building. Well, they gave it to us as a gift, and we had to like renovate that whole thing. And I think that took a good a couple months for sure. A couple months to renovate the whole space. Yeah,
well, hopefully we can do a month worth of work here in like 3 weeks. So.
You got 3 weeks. You're in deadline mode.
3 weeks.
Deadline mode. Well, all that stuff going on. I appreciate you coming on the show. We're kind of doing a little politics in faith kind of a series, and I thought we'd just take some things head on, because you're just the way that you write things on Facebook. They're just very succinct and clear. And as you say, you're committed to learning in public. And I'm committed to learning from you in public. So I like read your stuff, and I'm like, okay, he said that so well. And I thought we'd have you back on to just talk about some stuff. So first question, how do you interpret this political, cultural moment we find ourselves in? If you were to take a temperature, and how would you describe where we are?
Yeah, I think we're in a liminal moment, a moment where things can be seen more clearly than they could before, but also in a place of transformation, a moment when we could actually change as a people. I think we can get into this more later, but I think for many decades there's been a move to sort of undo politics in the United States as power of the majority to a power of the minority. And there is sort of a exponential acceleration of that energy in the MAGA movement. So things that used to be verboten or embarrassing or shameful are now a badge of pride and honor, and actually gain you rather than lose you clout. which is a pretty fast reversal in probably the span of just over or just under 10 years. We've gone from someone who if they said publicly they weren't going to certify an election, but rather ask the state to bring their own electors that did not validate the popular vote, that person wouldn't have any standing in either political party. And now it's sort of the litmus test to be a vice presidential candidate for Donald Trump. So I don't want to say unprecedented because, there may be precedents that I'm unaware of, but it certainly is striking how different this kind of election is and this kind of opponent is to, say, in 2008, when Barack Obama ran against, I think it was John McCain in 2008 when he ran against John McCain, or in 2012 when he ran against Mitt Romney. It's just we're living in a different political world. I mean, do you think so, Tom? Does it seem starkly different to you?
It feels very different. Like it used to be that I could have political conversations with people and not have as much anxiety as I do about it. And now, family, friends, mentors, folks that I know, respect, they're just caught up in the MAGA movement in a way that if I were to try and explain it to the me of 2008 or even 2004, what the political climate in 2020 and 2024 was going to be like, I would just say that's some weird dystopian sci-fi book you're telling me about. That can't be real. And yet here we are, where it just feels like we're in a really, I hate to use the word like crazy because I don't want to be, it just feels like we've kind of lost our minds politically. Yeah. And I don't understand it very well. I'm trying to, but I don't.
Yeah. Well, we can get into this. I think there's been a sustained assault or barrage of creating a moral outrage and panic, and it's been happening for a long time. I think you can trace it, the beginnings of it. It's always been present to some degree, but really ramping up of fear and panic and recruiting Christianity into that. You really see that post-World War II with the Red Scare and the threat of communism. And communism was an economic system, but communists were atheists. And so what you have is capitalists and Christians coming together in a new, galvanized way to oppose an American force that was clearly anti-capitalist and anti-Christian. And the common enemy really galvanized what was always a fairly wedded relationship between business interests or capitalist interest and Christian interests. And the rhetoric of people coming for our way of life. And, you see this in the McCarthy era where he's going after communists and gay people in the government, and they are going to take over our way of life, take us down, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a reason why it's called the Red Scare now. It's because we look back at it and we realize that it was all manufactured. The vast majority of it was manufactured hysteria. Mm-hmm. But that hasn't stopped the political benefits of manufacturing hysteria. So that's been going on for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe most famously then, and most recently, what has more continuity to today is the rise of the religious right. And we see, in the mid-'70s, Bill Bright talking about how our way of life is threatened. Francis Schaeffer on the 700 Club in 1982, basically comparing the levels of tyranny in America against Christians at a level that exceeds the level of tyranny during the American Revolution. I mean, this is 1982. This is right. This is like the birthing of the glorious religious right era in politics, and Ronald Reagan is in office, and it's whether it's Satanists or communists or gay people or Marxists or immigrants or socialists. I mean, you name it. Like there is, if you don't act today, they're going to come and they're going to take your churches. They're going to take your way of life. They're going to throw you in prison. You're going to lose. You're going to lose the ability to be a Christian, and it's just been going on now for almost 5 decades. And I think, Tom, some of the disorienting, what the heck is happening, is a result of that sustained, prolonged weaponization of fear and anger. We've been gaslit collectively by people in authority that we trusted for decades. And that has a psychological impact, man. It costs us psychologically. It's hard for us to care about being lied to. It's hard for us to be upset about it. It's hard for us to know when we're being manipulated and groomed or conditioned. It's hard for us to know when we believe propaganda versus believing the truth. I mean, just yesterday, Tom, hey, and you asked me one question, and I could talk on it for 50 minutes, so interrupt me. But yeah, just yesterday, there were anonymous internet kind of rumors going around, secondhand accounts that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were eating people's pets. Did you see this?
I just saw it today, yeah.
And within hours, elected GOP officials like congressmen, the J.D. Vance, the person who's running for president, other pundits, people who are frequently commenting on things from the right's perspective, Matt Walsh and others, like all of these people were repeating how awful it is that immigrants are coming after your pets. Pretty soon that got expanded to immigrants are they'll eat people too. So it got so bad that the Springfield police in Ohio had to say, look. They released a press release and said there is no credible reports of any immigrant eating a pet. Right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't... So in a different world, a vice presidential candidate repeating a rumor about a Haitian immigrant eating a pet and calling on people to be scared and angry about that, he would have looked like a clown, a fool. But we're just gonna. But now it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's just nothing. And so, I think we've been desensitized to that level, that kind of weaponized, ideological, and then dangerous, right? Because this kind of rhetoric endangers vulnerable, marginalized communities like Haitian immigrants, immigrants are already demonized as animals, as not human, as vermin, as poisoning the blood of our country. I mean, we've already been inundated with that kind of rhetoric, and this just re-ensconces or re-supports that sort of apparatus, that sort of imaginative apparatus that sees the world in terms of those people coming to take our way of life, and it lends credence then to moral justifications of increasing bits of violence and dehumanizing rhetoric. And if it means we have to throw out the electors and get our own electors to win Pennsylvania, well, that's what we have to do, because these people are eating our pets, and they're going to eat humans soon. Now, Tom, I know that sounds... So when I say that, it sounds like I'm the guy who's saying the sky is falling, right? The boy who cried wolf. It really actually sounds conspiratorial. But it's like happening in real time. And then before we get a chance to like have a national conversation about it, national discussion about it, something else incredibly ridiculous happens and we move on.
Yeah, we never processed what just happened.
No, we never have a chance to go, that was weird. Eating pets is kind of, I mean, that's funny. Oh, let's listen to some immigrant communities. Oh, let's look at some data. Oh, this kinds of thing makes your life more dangerous and difficult. It actually increases bias and prejudice against you, microaggressions and macroaggressions, racial and ethnic, cultural, and people are in this country already because they're escaping traumatizing, injurious cultures, and so it's like worsening like people's mental health and nervous systems. We don't ever have a chance to have that conversation because now we're on to the next incredulous thing. Mm-hmm. You know? And so I do think the accumulation of that, the propaganda, the being lied to, being gaslit, being desensitized to dehumanizing rhetoric, it erodes our ability to care.
Yeah, because now I'm moved on. I'm moved on to the next thing, and now I'm outraged about that. And this is not a both sidesism thing, but it happens to me too. Like, the last thing that outraged me, I forgot about because now I'm on the Haitian immigrant thing, and I haven't processed the last one. And so we keep moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And what I think like happens is we don't actually get a chance to talk about the problem that might actually exist within that network. Is, you know, there are an increased number of Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, and, you know, that does tax their healthcare system or something. That's a problem. That's real. That is a problem for us and the immigrants that we can't take it on if we're almost like making a cartoon out of this thing. We can't actually talk about the actual problem and find an actual good solution that humanizes all of us, because we're too busy using it as a football, a political football, to try and, you know, score a touchdown on the other side. And then you have that whole... Sorry, go for it.
To your point, Tom, like there was a bipartisan deal to deal with the perceived cause of the immigration issue, which is our border, right, with Mexico. There was a bipartisan deal that would have rectified some of the things that are leading to some of the problems communities like Springfield, Ohio feels. But it was sabotaged. Mm-hmm. Right? And it was sabotaged by Donald Trump because it would look good for Joe Biden. And we know this because he told us that. And then the people he instructed to sabotage it said, I voted against it because Donald Trump told me to vote against it. So this isn't like a conspiracy theory. I'm not trying to I'm not guessing, you know? And so, I don't know, like when you have somebody who's seeking power, who wants to keep something that's a problem, because he wants to use it as a wedge issue to weaponize against his opponents, then we have to be able to say, without it sounding partisan, that he doesn't really care about the problem. Mm-hmm. He cares about himself. And he wants to use the problem for his own political gain.
Yeah.
You can't solve problems when you have somebody like that controlling half of the political consciousness of the country. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah.
So we should be talking about that. And how do we resource communities to care for displaced populations, asylum seekers, immigrants, etc., who refugees who are here usually estranged from family and community, a vast majority of whom are not animals and rapists. Like, we have to have that conversation, but but it feels like we can't. We're stuck in a perpetual putting out political fires that are fueled by the problem.
Yeah, and we can't have the solution because we can't get together and talk about it, because that's the enemy and you don't fraternize with the enemy, because that would be bad. It's almost like we're watching like pro wrestling, and it's like, it's all fake, but it's all fake, it's all theater, it's all a show, yet there is a sense of realness to it. But you're watching it as if it's not scripted out. But here we are, you have two people going at each other's throats, and they get on. It's like, man, I used to watch wrestling as a kid. I know how it works. You get on, you talk junk about your opponent, and then you go and fight it out in the ring. And it's like we're watching wrestling, like pro wrestling in our political sphere, and we can't actually govern with entertainment. We can't govern with this, there's no bipartisan spaces to talk about this stuff and find actual solutions. It's a winner take all kind of a thing. And the people who are stuck in the middle, which is probably like 80% of the regular citizens of America that agree on a lot of things together, are pitted against each other by, these two opposing sides that are just going at each other's throats. I think one of those sides is a lot more heinous in what they're doing, and just a lot more blatant, obviously, what we're talking about. The GOP has been like totally taken over by the whole MAGA movement, which has absolutely radicalized so many people. But it's still political theater, and I think it's killing us. What are your thoughts on this political theater we're watching?
Yeah. And I think it's in political wrestling. It's called KFAB or KFAB.
Okay.
Yeah, it's where there's a word for it. Yeah. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I've read the word, but I haven't heard it said authoritatively. So, I mean, I think a lot of so there's a few things going on. I think so part of my reading, part of my sort of amateur learnings about this, Tom, has been like, the information I have right now, this is 2016, the information I have right now cannot explain the data I see. This doesn't make any sense to me. So I have to go back and figure out, how did this happen? How did a boorish, brutish, narcissistic sexual predator become the knight in shining armor to the family values party? Mm-hmm. Like, how did that happen? Right? And so I think a few things, I think a few things are true. One, I think you do have people that are grifting. They know they're lying. I mean, you see this with people like Tucker Carlson, who is caught on tape saying that his audience is a bunch of idiots, and he hates them. And he despises the people who pay his bills. And then he repeats lies that they want to pay for. So you have people who are just grifting and know they're grifting. Then I think the vast majority of MAGA types, not the elected officials, I think a lot of officials are craven grifters who are scared of losing power and so lie to keep power, or they are completely deluded. I mean, it's easier to lie when we delude ourselves, so a lot of people are deluded. But I think most MAGA people are true believers. Like they're well-intentioned people. They don't know that they're brainwashed, and they don't know that they're being lied to, and then they work overtime to not have to reckon with the existential crisis of, I've believed lies, and I've wrapped my life around this lie. I mean, that's a devastating thing to believe. Yeah. And so I think a vast majority of MAGA voters, are well-intentioned, sincere people who are doing everything they can to not have the existential crisis that would be if they reckoned with what's really going on.
That makes a lot of sense right there, what you just said about the existential crisis. Like not wanting to look at it, because, gosh, when you just look at it on its face value, it's like, how did, as you said, the sexual predator, playboy, billionaire, real estate New Yorker become the face of rural America and to evangelical Christianity, messiahship? Like, writing worship songs and selling Bibles and as fundraisers. And it's like, if you like switch out the party and just say all that is happened on the other side, my goodness, they would be like talking end times, rapture, Antichrist, all this kind of stuff. But since it's within their party that they identify with, they just turn a blind eye so easily to it. And then the criticisms that you send their way, they just hurl back at the other side and say, what are you talking about? All of that is true for your side. And there's like this apocalyptic language. It's been used, I remember since Reagan, might have been before, but apocalyptic language in politics is, if you don't vote for me, the world ends, kind of a thing. And I'm hearing that more than ever for this time around. What do you see as this role of apocalyptic language in our political conversations today?
Yeah. Well, I'm keenly aware that, like, I see MAGA as a threat to democracy. And I think, January 6th was kind of like this. I mean, it's been called a dress rehearsal, but really it was we have to remember that 3 police officers died there, right? But like that was really close to working, right? Now I have friends that say, well, Trump doesn't have the military, and so he could not sustain, any kind of like orchestrated coup of the United States. But I do think that our judicial system has been eroded / stacked with people who are interpreting laws creatively unto not prosecuting people in power of federal crimes. And I see that as a threat to the democratic norms and institutions and the confidence that we have that, like, hey, if I vote, it's not going to be tampered with. It actually is going to matter. And then I actually have a say in what happens here. I think the erosion of that creates a passive electorate, which is what people like oligarchs like Donald Trump want. He and his friends like Putin and Orban and Bolsonaro and others, they want the wealthiest billionaires and plutocrats, basically, to call all the shots, and for people like you and me, Tom, to trust them.
We're taking a quick break here mid-show to let you know of an opportunity that Choir is offering. Are you deconstructing your faith? It's tough, believe me, I know, I've done it. But what if you didn't have to do it alone? Imagine having guides like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zahn, Paul Young, and more by your side to help. I know I would have loved that on my journey. Well, now you can. Head on over to choiracademy.com, link will be in the show notes, and register for their Square 2 class using the promo code LIMINAL, and you will get 10% off. This course and community are designed to help you navigate your journey with wisdom and support, all because you're a fan of the Liminal Living podcast. And now back to our show.
We know what's best for you. And so one of the strategies to do that is just to erode confidence that democracy works, that government's any good. I mean, this is part of the issue with, you used to have debates over what's the best use of government. And then with Newt Gingrich and more in, like, Newt Gingrich made it explicit, and then it's become more and more and more as you have this obstructionist, chaotic, all government is bad, make it not work, and then use it not working as a reason to defund it, and that it doesn't work because it's defunded, and now you can defund it more. And so you have no regulations, and you have no social programs except for continuing to loan millions of dollars to billionaires at low interest and bailing out corporations that wreck our economy. Like you've got, and so what you have then is a political economy that's run by moneyed interests at the expense of you and me, who all the wealth flows upwards in, government contracts, in low interest loans, and bailouts, and tax incentives and shelters, etc. Right? And then enough people think that the government is your enemy and continue then to evacuate the work that the government should do, which is, the government isn't our enemy. In a representative democracy, the government is how we decide collectively to apportion our common resources for the common good. That's what it is. And it's not perfect, right? What we have isn't perfect. I mean, there are other democratic models that I think learned from how America set itself up and maybe function better. But politics isn't unchristian. The government isn't your enemy. And seeing the common good as your responsibility isn't communist. And all of that is under debate or is doubted because of this giant war on what's real. Now, that's my whole preamble to say, like, all of that can sound very apocalyptic. Like what I'm saying, I can sound like the sky is falling, and I can sound like the end is near, right? This guy with the sandwich board ringing a bell, wearing just his boxers and some bullhorns. But I do think that you have a fundamentally different party in the GOP in terms of what they've organized themselves to do than you did in, say, the 1980s or the 90s. And I think that we have to speak about that because one of the reasons we've gotten to this point is that people felt sheepish or, conspiracy theorists to say anything about it.
Yeah. And now here we are where, both sides are saying, if you vote for that side, then it's the end of America, kind of a thing. But if you really look at, what each political candidate wants to do, one wants to maintain how we have operated as a government, and the other wants to dismantle it and set up more of authoritarian. He wants to be the CEO of America, and that doesn't.
Yeah.
Christians are getting behind that because they don't trust the populace. They don't trust the people. They don't trust that they think that they have the capital T truth in order to, and they have to impose that upon the nation. We can't do that in a democracy. We're losing, our political clout. We're losing trust. We're losing authority.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, well, how are we gonna win if we can't control where this is all going? We can't win. So we're going to have to actually dismantle the democratic systems and set up an authoritarian system, because that's how we can get our way of life, our vision and our values for our country through as reality. But that dismantles the democratic system that we can actually use to fix what's actually broken.
Right. Right, Tom. You named something really important, I think, and that's some of us have an authoritarian, supremacist way of operating in the world. Mm-hmm. And some of us have a more egalitarian, pluralistic way of operating in the world. So I would hazard to guess that if you got an envelope in the mail, and on the envelope, inside the envelope was a letter and said, for every dollar you put in this envelope, we will spend 17 cents on smart bombs that kill children in Syria, Afghanistan, or Palestine. My guess is you would not put any money in that envelope. Mm-hmm. Right? But that's essentially what we do when we pay our federal taxes. It might not be 17 cents. There's some poli-sci economist person out there who's like, it's only 8 cents. The point is, I hate that my taxes pay for an imperialistic war machine that kills children. I hate it. Mm-hmm. My strategy then is to advocate for my elected leaders to reapportion the resources I donate away from that towards other things like social services that have shown to reduce the number of abortions among high-risk pregnancy or high-risk women who are pregnant. I think that's a better use of money to help desperate women who have no other choice but to choose an abortion, to find a way to financially or economically afford to be a mom if they want to. I think that's a great use of money. A much better use of my money than dropping bombs on kids. But an authoritarian supremacist isn't okay with just advocating for change. They've got to seize control of the democratic process, even if it means being anti-democratic, so that they get their way to do what they want. Right? Now, and I think what that ends up doing is that ends up violating other people's civil human rights. Always does. Mm-hmm. It always has, right? So, I mean, I think it's just, if there's a fundamental difference of what kind of power have I been given to use, and I'm speaking as a Christian here, what kind of power have I been given as a Christian to use to influence the world? And I don't think it's domination, coercion, and control. I think it's love and faith and the truth. And I see that operating differently than lying, cheating, stealing, etc.
Yeah. Now, our economic reality, we're in hard places. You know, our groceries are more expensive, gas is more expensive, and my friends, family, and people I know who support MAGA Donald Trump say things like, well, look at what Build Back Better has done. It's made everything more expensive. It's driven inflation up. It's done. And they have like this, well, I might not like the guy, but I like gas prices kind of a thing. I'm going to vote with my wallet and turn off the news kind of a mentality. Whether it's passively like that or actively saying, I think he has a better economic plan for the future because Kamala's been in there 3.5 years and she hasn't fixed it. These are things I've heard. Why do we blame economic realities on whoever is in the office? Is it just the easy game and we don't really want to see what the overarching problems actually are? Do we just not see what the problems are?
Yeah. Oh, man. This is such a huge question.
It is.
I don't have it at hand, but there have been articles written. For instance, the one I remember is that Goldman Sachs did an economic analysis, and they said the U.S. economy would likely perform better under Kamala Harris than Donald Trump. You know, dozens of business leaders, CEOs, have said the economies will be better under Harris. If you look at like debt and you look at a lot of economic indicators under Harris and Biden. I mean, they like to talk about job creation. They like to talk about unemployment rate, et cetera. I mean, the data doesn't back up the propaganda from Trump about the economy. Now, I think our economy is sick, is diseased. Right? I think it's not a human-centered economy. I think it's a profit-centered economy. And in a profit-centered economy, what I mean is the bottom line isn't human flourishing. The bottom line is more growth and wealth. What ends up happening is that humans become resources through which to extract growth and wealth versus the end goal that growth and wealth serve. So so for instance, our healthcare system is designed, I think I talked about this last time, is designed to maximize profits for shareholders. And more specifically, to maximize perceived shareholder value for the next quarter.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that you and I, Tom, get good health care. Right?
Yep.
So other countries have figured this out. Hey, if we regulate this and set this up to care for humans, people who provide the services won't make as much money. But the U.S. has decided to do it differently. We're going to, for the most part, set it up so that humans can maximize their profits doing the business of healthcare. I mean, when the insulin vaccine and what was the other one, a polio vaccine, when they were invented, the people who invented them were like, it didn't even occur to them to charge money for that. The patent was like $1 or something. For them, it was like, because they hadn't, their imaginations for what is good and right and true hadn't been colonized yet by this neoliberal finance-driven economy we have. And so it was just obvious to them. Well, what happened was, like, companies like the one in my hometown, Eli Lilly, took that $1, patent vaccine for insulin and subtly changed it, like every few years, and then charged thousands and thousands of dollars for an insulin vaccine that was no longer under the patent because it had been changed, so they could profit off of it, right? It's just a fundamentally different telos, goal. What is this for? What are we doing medicine for, right? And I think our world, inside our political economy, it's to maximize, to grow and to maximize profit. So all that to say is, who has the better economic plan? Well, our economy is cancerous. And so asking which is a better whatever. But so inside the cancerous economy, though, what I want to see is more people getting a livable wage. What I want to see is wealth inequality lessening, right? So CEOs who've doubled their wealth since the pandemic. I'm sorry, the richest, like 40-some people, have doubled their wealth since the pandemic.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not virtuous. Maybe Tom and Matt and Jim and Hezekiah who are listening, maybe we all suffer because of that, And so, part of me feels like evaluating the economic policies of Harris and Biden and Trump and Vance is like, which is the better, like, who arranges the chairs on the Titanic better. But there are little things you can do to increase quality of life, access to healthcare, things that actually help us. So right now I'm trying to get ADHD medicine, and my insurance company, the one I can afford, will not pay for it because they won't make enough money if I get it. So I have to go through these hoops of taking these other medicines that don't work to try the thing that my doctor, my psychiatrist says, I think this will work for you. If somebody passed legislation that advocated for the consumer, that a healthcare company couldn't deny coverage based upon them making less money, that doesn't fix the system, but it actually helps real people not spend months in a place of wanting help for their mental health, but not being able to get it, which creates all kinds of problems, hypothetically speaking, in their marriage and their family, you know what I mean? And their neighborhood and their church, right? The collective suffering of that decision by that healthcare company, if somebody could mitigate that, I'd support that. Even if I think the system is rotten, I'd support that move. And the person who pays for it is the company whose net worth is $874 million, and maybe next year their net worth is $784 million.
I think they can afford that.
That suffering just doesn't register for me.
Serious.
Like somebody waiting 90 days, having 90 more days of not feeling like they can access their prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
Not to make this about me. I'm just trying to make it like we can talk about these things in such a, so like, what do I think about them? People saying that Trump's economy would be better. Well, I actually think data, I do think that the entire edifice that the right has built their economic policy on, really beginning with Ronald Reagan and the neoliberal finance-driven sort of consensus of what's commonly referred to as supply side or trickle-down economics, it has been an abject failure.
Yeah.
An abject failure. Study after study has shown it doesn't trickle down, that it actually trickles wealth up. People like Friedman and Hayek who wrote about this stuff, the University of Chicago School of Economics that all this neoliberal thought was based upon, were terrified of state-run governments coming out of World War II. You had the state government, the Nazis, totalitarian government, then that's the right, and then on the left, you had the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, the communists, right, which was the state-run government on the left. And these people were terrified of state-run totalitarian governments, and so they went full-on libertarian kind of individual. And instead of the government determining economic policy, the market had a magical, even divine element to it. That if you just let the market be free, it would order society in a way that was best for everybody. And I'm sympathetic to why. Okay, if I'm trying to stay away from communism and fascism, I can understand being scared of how governments could seize control and ruin people's lives. I get it. But, we're almost 50 years on, and it's been an abject failure. There has to be a different way of ordering our economy than what we've done. That's good for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, if you just even look at a timeline of wealth inequality from then till now. Oh yeah. I mean, the numbers are utterly astounding about not just even in America, but across the globe. I think it's, 52 people have more money than the bottom half of humanity combined. Yeah. And it's just, it isn't working. And I know that Donald Trump has proposed cutting the corporate tax rate down to 15%, which, small businesses have to pay 25 to 30% in taxes. Why do large corporations, why are they only going to pay 15? I think that's going to further this problem of funneling money towards the top that never gets to the bottom. And, you look at, the average income in America is $77,000. But when you take billionaires and millionaires out of it, that number drastically drops into the 30s and 40,000s. And it's like, we can't live on that. This is unsustainable where we are. And I like how you say it is cancerous. That's a good descriptor because it's just eating away at us. Do you think that's driving the fear and the anger that then the right uses to get people over to their side for their economic plans?
Yeah, man. I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, I don't know if where you are has Kroger. Kroger is one of the largest grocery store chains in the country now.
Yeah, we got one.
Yeah, they just admitted to price gouging a couple weeks back. Actively raising prices. Like, it's illegal. Price gouging is illegal. But there's going to be But the fines they will incur from price gouging are less than the profits they'll make from price gouging. This is the same thing with the lawsuit that Fox News had with Dominion. I forget how much it was, like 600, 700 million they had to pay out on the lawsuit that Dominion brought against them for saying that Dominion voting machines were bad and that the big lie. But the truth is, Fox News made more money off of lying than they had to pay in the fines for lying. So there's no deterrent to follow the law when it pays to break the law. Right?
That's logical sense right there.
Right? But this is what happens when you deregulate things. Now, look, regulation can be an awful nightmare. I'm not saying all regulation is good. I'd rather have the conversation about how to regulate effectively than to be fighting for regulation against people who say, if you just get rid of all regulation, the billionaires will do right by you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just fundamentally not true. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like saying, if you get rid of voting, the government will do right by you. That's fundamentally not true.
Mm-hmm.
Ask anybody who's lived in a monarchy, right? So like neither of those stories are true. And right now we've got one party in our country that keeps gaslighting us that one of those stories is true and it's not. And I wish we could just have a conversation between 2, 3, maybe 4 parties, Tom, that had different ideas on how to, quote, regulate, how to collect taxes, what should we spend them for, how to organize for human flourishing, versus fighting for Kroger. Can we do something about grocery stores gouging us, please?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yes, I think that economic anxiety is felt by everybody. And then what happens is, what the danger of a strong man is a strong man identifies a marginalized or vulnerable person as the scapegoat, right?
Yep.
The reason why you hate your job is because they are taking your jobs. Not because, there's been a 120-year war on unions, so you can't organize for a better salary. No, they are coming to take your jobs. Your jobs are being shipped overseas. Some of them are, right? But like usually it's like demonizing poor people, demonizing non-white people for your problems.
Mm-hmm.
And man, if I can find somebody to hate, and then somebody promises to defeat the people I hate, and then that will mythically solve my economic anxiety, yeah, that's easy. That's super easy.
Yeah.
It feels good too.
Yeah,
Right?
because now I won. All right, I want to switch over to another topic, and that is, churches there's a separation of church and state. I can have this political conversation with you on my personal, my personal page, my personal podcast, all that kind of stuff. What are pastors tasked with saying from pulpits that maintains the separation of church and state? How much can we blend messages? I know conversations are way more healthier, but there is that like desire to say something. How political can we get in a pulpit before we start crossing lines that we shouldn't as religious entities where there's separation of church and state? How do you walk those lines?
Yeah. Well, I had to think about this question. I got asked recently to be on a live event called Evangelicals for Harris.
Mm-hmm.
I got invited, even though I'm in a mainline denomination, and the reason I left sort of institutional evangelicalism is because they didn't want me anymore. Right?
I saw that. I'm like, he's not an evangelical. What's he doing?
The gatekeepers did not. The gatekeepers were telling me you're not an evangelical, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm. But part of that is evangelical is bigger than the branded institutions, and so there's a lot of, and on this call there were a lot of, brown, black, Asian evangelicals who also don't fit in well with the white institution of evangelicalism, right? So the tent's a little depends on who's defining the tent. Mm-hmm. But I had to ask this question because I'm a priest at a church, and I talked to my co-rectors, people I pastor with, and I said, hey, I don't know if I should do this or not, and what does this mean for our church? And I talked to my bishop about this last week, and I thought I'll just echo her words because they're wise. She said, you as a private citizen, you don't relinquish or renounce your rights to be politically active in a democracy. As a private citizen, she said, where it gets complicated or confusing is where you use your authority as a priest to endorse or support a candidate. And so what it was decided was I could go in onto this call and I can post on social media as a private citizen, but I'm very, very cautious and careful when I'm acting as an official representative of my church or at my church or in the pulpit or speaking, with my responsibility to my church, that I'm not endorsing or supporting a candidate to give the impression or to make the suggestion or to influence people that you have to agree with me about this, you have to vote this way. So I'm uncomfortable with that. I'd rather Tom be apolitical, and I was for a long, long time, but I no longer consider that a Christian option. And so I have to find a way to situate myself in a faithful place, advocating politically.
Say more about that is no longer a Christian option. That was a very provocative phrase that I want to hear more about.
Oh gosh. I'll try. I'm you know me. I'm always ranting or rabbit trailing. I'm gonna try to stay really. I'm gonna try to speak the way I write on social media. There have been two responses to MAGA I've seen from Christians, and neither are satisfactory to me. One is people want to make Harris or Trump their savior, but that's idolatry. Jesus is your savior.
I've seen that.
Okay. The second is the world is going to hell. Let them fight over the world. But you're a pastor, you're a Christian, you preach Jesus, and let the world be the world. Now, they're very similar, right? Mm-hmm. They have similar logics behind them, but I hear those are two, I guess, versions of the same kind of opt-out, right? But I don't. If you're going to just focus on Jesus, then when you focus on Jesus, you realize how political he was, right? So the politics then is just people organizing and deciding together in a representative democracy how to best use our common resources for the common good. And so Jesus proclaimed a politic. He proclaimed a kingdom of God. Jesus wasn't in a representative democracy. He was in an imperial monarchy where they were colonized citizens. So he didn't have any say-so in what his taxes that were extracted from peasants were spent on. He had no say in that. And so we actually do, We actually voted on a measure to continue to fund public schooling in my town. Mm-hmm. And if I hadn't have voted, I recuse myself from saying, yes, I think funding public schools is a good use of my money, our money. Jesus didn't have that option. So, first of all, I think the kingdom of God, what Jesus proclaims, is a relational, socio-economic reality with him as Lord that has a logic and a coherence that animates it, that is set up against what I would call mammon, which is a logic of the world, and it looks different in every culture. In our culture, it looks like neoliberal finance-driven capitalism. I think Jesus actually calls us into living contrary or in opposition to that. Now, I do that in my church all the time. So, for instance, if you don't pay taxes in the civic society, eventually you'll get thrown into prison, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm not, in my church, I don't police how much people give to our church. We keep calling people into that. So I treat the church politic differently than the politic I submit to in the world, right? There are differences and distinctions. But I am going to advocate and use my voice to lend it to the collective discernment about what my money is for, what my possessions are for, what my property is for, etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I have become convinced that, and this is from listening to people who don't benefit from the status quo, that being apolitical as a white, able-bodied, heterosexual, Christian, affluent man is a feature of my privilege. Because my life essentially stays the same, regardless of who's in power. Right? I'm thinking about my friend Celestine, who is a asylum seeker, and during the election of 2020, he was in this queue to be deported at any moment. Now he's like in the legal system. He's on the record books. He's not running from anybody. He's got a green card even. But he was marked for immediate deportation by executive order, and when Biden won, he rescinded that executive order. I don't know how to love my neighbor, Celestine, and look him in the eye and say, I am sorry, man, I'm not political. What would that communicate to him? That I love Jesus more than politics, so I'm not going to use my vote to keep you alive. How do I love my neighbor in a representative democracy and not engage politically? I've learned this from socioeconomically poor people and from BIPOC people and from non-Western people. That the thought that I can do that is privilege. It's an artifact of my white supremacist privilege. Mm-hmm. And so, but yeah, I just don't. I'm learning to think about it differently, Tom.
Yeah.
You know, and people whose lives hang in the balance because of different policies or politicians have taught me that.
We gotta listen.
Well, yeah, but it's this too.
And act.
I realized, Tom, if I just said to Celestine, you know what, put your hope in God, not in humans, and trust God no matter what happens. If that was my basic message to him. Now I do say trust God to him, but if that's my message, then I don't understand how that's different than seeing a person who's naked and hungry and saying, "Go in peace, be warm and well fed."
Right out of the lecture from last week.
Right. James teaches that faith deals with the needs of the body. And the way in a representative democracy we deal with the needs of the body is we use our agency to influence policy that meets the needs of people's bodies.
Well, that's so simple.
Yeah, but then again, like I'll say, okay, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. And on this Evangelicals for Harris call, I called her out. I told her that our economic system is unjust and cancerous, and you have to end this neoliberal experiment. Now, she's mostly a neoliberal shill, meaning she's going to be elected because she's giving promises to billionaires and plutocrats, and it will be marginally better than Donald Trump. So I'm voting for somebody who's going to do a lot of things that I don't agree with. And, you know, that I don't know how we vote and that for that not to happen. I also called on her to stop supporting the ongoing war in Palestine. Let's use our leverage to call for a ceasefire. Let's stop paying for bombs that are killing children. Now, that doesn't mean I don't care about Israeli children dying. I do too. But our government isn't paying for bombs that are killing Israeli children. My money's being used for bombs that are killing Palestinian children. I want my money to stop being used for that. And so I said that to her. So my vote for her is probably a vote for continued support for that. Mm-hmm. But that's going to happen whether Trump or Kamala Harris is in office. And so we get into layers of complexity and layers of compromised agency and responsibility when we talk, and we don't like that. We don't like talking about how we're responsible for things our money pays for. We want to be responsible for things we intend, things we choose, things we can see. I get that. So I think that's another reason why people want to opt out of the political process, is because we have to develop a more sophisticated lexicon and logical apparatus to talk about things like agency, responsibility, culpability. To what degree am I culpable in what's happening in Palestine? That question makes Christians uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that.
Pro-Israel Christians lose their mind when I say that. But even for those of us who just want to see the fighting stop, I want to see both Israeli kids and Palestinian kids stop dying. I want to see it both happen. It's still a morally complicated question, one that really the scriptures don't even talk about because they can't imagine a global economy like what we have, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, Tom, I don't think opting out of our political system is a position I can take as a Christian, because Jesus was political and he took it very seriously, and so did his followers. In a representative democracy, the government isn't something separate than us. It is us. And when I opt out of being the government, the vulnerable and the marginalized, those who don't benefit from the status quo, they pay the cost. Those are the three reasons.
Those are very clear. And I like how you framed that. That was... because I'm not voting for one side with all of my heart. You know, it's like I have a lot of issues with how wrapped up the Democratic Party is with itself and with its the large corporate donors. But I think it's going to preserve the democratic systems that we can use to change things, whereas a vote for Trump is a vote to take down the democratic systems, make America a business with a CEO, and then all of a sudden we don't have the voice to fix what's wrong. And we trusted the wrong person to fix things, and now we don't have the voice to fix things. So it feels apocalyptic to me. It feels like, oh my gosh, we've never been here before. Even though we've been using the language, something feels different about this one, and it does cause anxiety. So, last question, what kind of encouragement and hope do you have for us going into this election cycle?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll just describe what I'm learning. One is that my nervous system can only handle so much.
Yeah.
Like my body isn't created to care about everything all the time, all at once. It's just not. And so, I have to learn how to take care of myself, how to build resilience, how to say no, how to soothe myself in ways that are sanctifying. You know what I mean? So that's one thing. Just learning how to pay attention to when fear, panic, terror, dread, trauma come online in your body. That's huge, because I think MAGA loses its power if people begin to take dominion of their bodies and no longer are tossed to and fro by human cunning and deceitful schemes. I think if we begin to tend to our bodies, begin to notice how fear lives there, panic lives there, terror lives there, rage lives there, then we're less likely to be drug around by them. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing, listener. The second thing is, I'm trying to practice Tom, and you know this just from our interactions online, I'm trying to practice just like truth telling as holding on to reality.
Yeah.
You know?
Holding on to reality. I love that phrase.
Holding on to reality, right? Yeah. I mean, last week, we had an awful school shooting in Georgia, the 418th school shooting mass school shooting since Columbine. Mm-hmm. Almost 400,000 kids have been impacted by school shootings since Columbine. And last week, you have Donald Trump telling a Moms for Liberty conversation that was taped and broadcast everywhere that kids are going to school and coming home with gender reassignment surgery, which isn't happening. Now, you may have some kids who have gender dysphoria and their parents won't listen, or they don't feel like they can talk to their parents unless they talk to a school counselor about gender dysphoria. And a school counselor's like, yes, I'll call you by these different pronouns. That might be happening. But kids having gender reassignment surgery at W.E.D. Du Bois Elementary School is not happening. Mm-hmm. Right? And so just saying, listen, there not only is there a unwillingness to talk about the real tragedy in our schools because too many politicians are paid by the gun lobby. But on top of that, there is lying about and inventing a crisis that's not happening in our schools. And those two things can lead us to despair. But if we just say, that's not true, this is true, let's continue to advocate for what's true. I think that is a holy discipline. I think we need that as a gaslit people. And that's part of building resilience, is that I think I'm as guilty as anybody as feeling exasperated, but just building the resilience of looking each other in the eye and telling the truth. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, I think one of the damages that the culture war religious right has done for the last generation is that many of us have culture war PTSD and we want nothing to do with politics. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say there's a way of caring about it where the politician you vote for doesn't have to be your savior. This is part of the Christian response to MAGA that I think is just so unhelpful. I like Tim Walz. I think I'd have a beer with Tim Walz. I don't think he's my savior. I think he's a decent guy. Yeah. Kamala Harris did some awful things as a prosecutor. Awful. And I don't support that at all. But I don't think she's a sociopathic narcissist. Mm-hmm. So my vote for her is like, she's a lot more normal, even if I disagree with her, than somebody who is a convicted rapist. A convicted rapist. Like, that shouldn't be controversial or weird for a Christian to say that, Yeah. So for me, it's like just reclaiming, like, I can support Hollis and Walz without seeing MAGA as demonic enemies or making Harris and Walz the saviors, Mm-hmm. The putting all my hope in them. I can just say that I think their policies overall are better for the people I love.
I like that phrase.
I
like how you just simplify it like that. It's like their policies are better for the people I love. I'm going to use that one. Use that one. I really am.
Okay. Well, gosh. Let's see if it's true. I mean, I think it's true. Not better for everybody I love, but
yeah. I mean, I think our political system is just that broken to where we get what we get, and hopefully we can use the next chapter after this. We'll actually have the systems in place to build something for the common good and not something for a winner takes all. And because we're not going to be in the winners club, being on the lower echelons. We're not billionaires and millionaires and lobbyists and politicians and all that stuff. So,
yeah.
Matt, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your clarity, and I appreciate you taking large, complex things and simplifying them in bullet points. It's been helpful for me. I hope it is helpful for the folks listening too. I hope we preserve democracy. 4 more years of democracy. Let's
do 4 more years. Can I just caveat everything that I've said? So yep. I tend to get a little cranked up, and I tend to speak with a lot of passion, and maybe that energy or emotion conveys that more confidence than I feel. I have changed so much since Donald Trump was elected, and so I just want to own that. Like, I'm in process. You mentioned learning in public. I want to learn in public, and if my passion or my zealousness sort of prevent other people from learning, that's never my intent. So, I guess I just want to own that. Like, these are like, I'm relatively confident in the things I've said today, but I consider it a joy, a welcome joy. If anything I've said today needs to be repented of, I consider that a joy to do. Because how else am I going to follow Jesus if I'm not willing to repent? So I just want to name that for everybody, for me, for you, and just say, like, even in relative confidence, we can be willing to change and yield. That's what the wisdom from above is, willing to yield. The love that Paul celebrates does not insist on its own way. And so being open to change is who I want to be. I'm committed to that, even if I don't always know how to do it well.
And if we all did that, I think we would be in a much better place.
It'd be great.
Much better place.
I'll take that. I'll vote for that person.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's just been another joy to talk to you again. It was great.
Yeah, Tom. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Liminal Living Podcast today. I hope that you found this conversation with Matt Tebbe engaging. I hope that you had the emotional vigor to take it on in a good way, in a helpful way. I hope that you found some insights in there that are going to help you in this very difficult voting political season that we're in, because Matt's clarity and passion for seeing justice and love and truth reign in the church and in society is just so much needed wisdom in his words that are so helpful for us today. So if this resonated with you, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. Your support helps us keep bringing these important conversations out into the light. And be sure to check out Matt's work at the Open Table, at the Table Church and Gravity Leadership, his podcast. Go and subscribe. You'll love his conversations. He's creating good spaces for leaders to grow in their faith and have a commitment to justice. As always, stay tuned for more discussions on the Liminal Living Podcast. Next week, we're going to have a great journey through the liminal intersections of faith, life, society, politics, and all that mess. So until then, take care. Keep seeking out those spaces where transformation and hope intersect, and live in that liminal space. Peace out.